This is Vital Signs, a podcast on cutting-edge trends in health tech and the people shaping them. Today, we had an awesome guest in Hemant Taneja, the CEO of General Catalyst. Hemant has been involved in the creation of some massive healthcare companies, including Livongo, Transcarent, and Kimure. He also is an investor in Samsara and Stripe. And we had a really wide-ranging conversation. We talked about the future of healthcare and where Hemant sees the most transformation in the next 5 years. We talked about the future of AI and which industries will be most impacted, as well as how they think about tech-enabled services. We also hit on the future of venture and when venture funding makes sense for services businesses, as well as where the asset class as a whole is going. A really interesting conversation. Without further ado, here's Hemant. I guess there's so many different ways we could start, but I feel starting at the highest level might be easiest. You guys obviously have made a tremendous investment in healthcare. I'm sure at the start of the decade, you had all sorts of visions for where we'd be in 2030. We're, nearing halfway through. Where are we kind of today relative to where you thought that we'd be?
In healthcare? So I've actually been doing healthcare for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And the first company I incubated was in 2005. I started on that process with some data folks that introduced electronic health record data. And that's the very concept to me. And we ended up building a company called Humedica, which would essentially use medical records for quality of care for health systems, and then other industries would use the same data. Taught me a lot about how the technology was really not serving the industry well. Because if you think about it, all the digitization, it led to less efficient workforces in the health systems, and you had to create more jobs around scribes.
Yeah.
So it's like literally the antithesis of what technology is supposed to do. So I went down the path and said, okay, how do we really go solve that problem? The first time things really worked at scale for us was obviously Livongo, and that we started in 2013, so about a decade or so ago. And the core belief was, think about consumer experiences. Think about cultures that are interdisciplinary between technology and healthcare, and think about health assurance, as I call it now, which is proactive, affordable, accessible healthcare. And so when we started Livongo, I was like, hey, the diabetes cost, are $300 billion in the United States. We should figure out how to take out $100 billion of that. And if we're successful, that should be our goal. And I literally said that at the beginning of when we started the business. And obviously we ended up selling that in 21. And by then we're only serving 500,000 lives. So to answer your question about 2030, you sort of realize the physics of, company building and ecosystem building to do a transformation of an industry and how long it actually takes. I would say 10 years in, we have 150 companies in healthcare. I think we'll talk about all the other things we're doing there probably as well. But the reality is that it is inflecting the scope of change. And, by 2030, my personal belief is that we will have a blueprint for what the health assurance model needs to be. We'll have a blueprint for the role of consumer services, the role of AI, and also the role of the health systems in what that health assurance vision really ought to look like. And if we have that blueprint, then maybe the decade after is going to be all about scaling.
And obviously, I feel like you're doing a lot to create that blueprint. I mean, I think maybe most notably grabbing headlines and buying a health system and using that as kind of a bed for innovation. Maybe talk a little bit about that and kind of what inspired that and how you think about what your work with that system might entail. And obviously, you deeply partner with some in kind of the health assurance ecosystem. Now you actually have full control over one. How do you think about that?
Yeah, look, at the highest level, we sort of decided we're going to go transform healthcare. Then we also recognize a couple of things in terms of just core principles with which that's going to happen. One is we can't do it alone. No single company can do it. So the Amazon of healthcare is not going to be a single company. It'll be $1 trillion ecosystem. And the other thing is, that it's not going to happen unless we partner with the systems. Innovation and partnerships is going to be key. Radical collaboration, as we call it. It's not going to be disruption. And so I'm probably a bit of a contrarian sitting in Silicon Valley when I say that, because I think some others who do healthcare, when they listen to me on that, they don't believe it. They think it's not how it's going to get there. But I believe that our firm believes that. So, the way we went down the path when we started building these companies and investing more aggressively post-COVID, we started doing these partnerships. We had HCA and Jefferson Health and others, and we said, hey, we'll work with you. We'll be your McKinsey. We're not going to charge you. You teach us what the problems are, and we'll bring solutions, and we'll help you figure out how to create that proactive, affordable, accessible health system. So that's the journey we've been on. It's going well. And then a couple of years ago, I took a look at that and said, how do we accelerate that? And that's when we said, it'd be amazing to go partner with the community that is like-minded, wants to become the blueprint for that healthcare innovation for the country. And, our dedication is towards figuring out how to make the health systems more economically vibrant so they can invest in their communities. I wonder if we can go buy a health system and actually do this hands-on. With our founders that are building the different parts of the stack with us at one of those places. And so that's what led to creating Hatco and, eventually this sort of this whole the Summa Health. It's not closed yet. We're still waiting for Attorney General approval. But the whole idea of, hey, let's go get to know the community, the leadership, and see if they want to do with us. And, we were lucky. We have a really innovative leadership team at Summa and a community that's excited to become, sort of have the spotlight on them for the new model, if you will.
I've heard you talk about this before, about this idea of like you have to kind of partner with the system and which obviously is different than maybe the investing you do in other spaces and the way Silicon Valley traditionally thinks about things. What implications does that have for like the type of entrepreneurs that you end up working with in healthcare?
It's a great question. So I think the implication is that you need a founding team that truly understands both technology and the industry you're transforming. I'll generalize from healthcare because we also do it in other industries, industrial, defense, energy, and others now. And so it's about creating that true culture that's interdisciplinary from the beginning. That's the secret. And I think sometimes you can actually get that in a single person. We started this company, Hippocratic, and, Munjal had been... He built a machine learning company called Like.com and then built Health IQ, which was, in the healthcare space, kind of knew both sides. And I was like, this is a person that with the right team around them would understand the nuances of both of the different cultures and how you need to interoperate. Sometimes you need, 2 or 3 people. Like Glenn and I, we were a perfect complement when we started Livongo because he knew how to go, create commercial traction in healthcare. And I played the sort of technologist, sort of that put together the team and the architecture on the other side of it. So that was like a great interdisciplinary culture we were able to create.
Because I think some people will look at healthcare today and they'll say, oh, what we really need is some sort of like something that's just completely orthogonal to the system today. And so maybe if we take AI, for example, I feel like there's people that get excited about like, what would a WebMD 2.0 look like? Something that's just a consumer AI product that's like, is kind of sits outside the system. Curious, does any of that stuff like interest you, or do you think it ultimately all needs to kind of like integrate back into, the kind of core providers?
All of that interests me. So we're actually working with a team on, how does the consumer really identify and navigate their health on the internet? Is it going to be a WebMD like, a better website, or is it going to be a ChatGPT like framing? We don't really know, but like, what's the intelligence that drives that? So we actually want it to be that the consumer experience is thought through from first principles. But I think if you want to have impact at scale, it's naive to say, those 5,000 hospitals and those, 3 million nurses and a million physicians, ignore them all because we're just going to write some software and that's just going to do this at scale. So I think it's much more, it's just a mindset of we need to create avant-garde innovation. I mean, at Hippocratic, we created Polaris, which is a language model for healthcare and the smartest, most empathetic, fully agentic nurse that exists today. That's as avant-garde as I would be if you think about it. But the question is, okay, so what do you do with it? And so you have to now sit with the players in the ecosystem to say, hey, we figured out how to make the nurse resource on the phone close to free. What should the care model look like? Let's work with them and think through that. So I think to me, it really is about co-creating these ideas where we bring the most advanced technological capabilities, but then we work with the people that are in charge of delivering care and say, hey, what is that new experience?
Yeah. I mean, you've obviously been very successful with these incubations. I wonder over the years, have you developed your own kind of like internal barometer for when an incubation does and doesn't make sense?
Look, we do it where it's highly strategic for the industry which we were trying to transform. The first one we did was Kayak. We really sort of brought the search model to travel. We did Demandware, which is Salesforce Commerce Cloud now. And then I've done a slew of these in health, which is, Livongo, Commure, Transcarent, Homeward, Hippocratic. And those were all, hey, here's the platforms that need to exist. And we've sort of learned how to help founders team up with them, become their co-founders, have access to the markets, and really create these complex services that are capital efficient and need multiple dimensions, like quickly and with great efficacy. So once we had that playbook, we said, let's go get all the pieces together. I wrote this in my book on healthcare, that health transformation require 10 to 15 platforms.
Yeah.
So we've sort of been systematically saying, what are those things needing to be? We'll get some of those right. And I think entrepreneurs will build others. And hopefully then we have the solution set that's required to do the transformation. So, I've always looked for complex issues, capital intense, need multidisciplinary skills, aren't already happening in the ecosystem. And we can be a key accelerant. I would sort of look at those criteria. Otherwise, a lot easier to just back a great founder, back John and Patrick, which we're both investors in, and let them do their thing. And it's like, that's my largest investment in Stripe, probably the least amount of time. Yeah. And probably we're going to be one of our best returns. So I think we are, the bar is very high when we take on a creation opportunity. There's a lot of deliberation internally on should we take it on and with who and why.
I mean, one thing I'm struck by is obviously, you spend a lot of time in tech-enabled services and in kind of the healthcare world, and now it feels like the broader tech world is getting very excited about tech-enabled services. Everything AI, you can sell the software in, but a lot of folks, including yourselves, are very excited about actually just taking over the end.
There's a very simple reason for that. You're going from an era of selling workflows to selling work.
Yeah.
So a tech-enabled service is work, right? I think this whole sort of service as a software idea, which was very clever. I should have thought of that versus software as a service. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And I think this, in the world of agentic solutions, why do you need workflows? You're just going to sell work. And over time, it's going to be, it'll start from some percentage being agentic and some percentage being human to in a lot of these things, like, at some point the AI becomes the pilot. So I think that is the biggest opportunity. And so, contrarian thing I believe today is the companies that are the worst from a margin perspective and not growing and in services, stuff we would never touch in venture, those companies and their transformation will lead to some of the most exciting IPOs 10 to 15 years from now.
How do you decide, think about when selling software makes sense versus doing the kind of full tech-enabled services?
So we have this idea of is AI the pilot or the co-pilot?
Yeah.
Right. And so there are many criteria there. Obviously, what creates the best consumer experience? The other is what's the level of responsibility in those decisions? So like in healthcare, if it's revenue cycle management, AI can be the pilot. If it's physician diagnosing consumers, at least for a while, let AI be the co-pilot, and let's turn that into easy to use software for the physicians. And so I think there's a continuum in any industry on how to use it and where, and the key is sort of getting those design constraints right, so that we can get down the curve. They're all going to become pilots over time. Right. I think the question is, where do you start so that you give measured agency to the agentic workflows over time? And, at Hippocratic, in fact, I give Munjal a lot of credit. We debated a lot. I was like, no, a nurse has to be a co-pilot. What are you talking about? These are serious decisions. You're going to be checking on people's medications, how they're feeling. He's like, no, I think we can make it a pilot. And, to give him credit, he was courageous and it worked incredibly well. But it took a lot of training, a lot of collaboration with the systems, their data, their nurses training, sort of giving us guidance, but we got there. And so I think getting those calls right is going to determine who wins in the different categories of sort of, technology-enabled services, as you call it, that are getting built.
Right. It seems like there's a possibility to actually do a pilot ends up being far more compelling.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. In that case, I would have thought maybe that, hey, that's 3-5 years out or something to actually get, clinical decision-making, into a pilot mode.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Another thing I feel like is a key part of the way you think about the world is on the healthcare side is obviously kind of platforms and something, and I think you've, famously kind of taken entities like Commure and Transcarent and obviously, put other companies kind of into those entities. Maybe talk a little bit about you both have the 150 investments, but then I think also kind of believe in these 10, 15 platforms. And so how does this all kind of shake out?
So I think a lot of people think I'm going on a shopping spree and buying these companies. That's not quite the intention. The reality is that what's happened in these markets that were in some ways laggards in adoption of technology, like you think about healthcare, industrial, logistics, you pick which are these markets. The software industry, because they were slow adopters, it basically served them with a bunch of point solutions. Okay. And so what you have in these industries, like all these point solutions that don't really drive the ROI and counterproductive in the case of healthcare, as I mentioned. So part of our strategy has been, hey, every one of these companies should have a categorically defining software company that serves them. We saw that with Viva first, if you remember. We weren't involved in that, but what a great sort of outcome. And I think probably there's a new Viva to be built. I'm doing that with our team at Commure. Applied Intuition is doing that in automotive. If you look at Samsara and Sanjay, they did that in IoT. If you look at Anduril in defense, they're doing that. These are all companies we've backed, and so I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And so we've been looking at who are these compound startup founders that we can partner with, and basically reorganize these spaces with a platform underneath, the right use of AI, and start consolidating these use cases so that these customers in these industries are very large markets have platform relationships with like select companies. I think that's a really interesting opportunity. It's a lot of hard work. Yeah. It's a grind, and you have to have impedance match with companies in these spaces. A lot of these businesses are captive to their customers in some cases. And then you have to, deal with change management. And like these are special situations kind of opportunities, which is what our creation fund and Mark Bhargava, who helps lead it, does a lot of the work on. But I also think the prize is very big in helping, create these kind of defining companies for these spaces.
I mean, given that kind of focus on platform, both how many of like companies end up really mattering, in health tech, do you think longer term? And then I think a question everyone's asking now is like, what portion of venture dollars should be going into healthcare, like given some of these dynamics?
I don't know the answer to that. I would say in some ways, a lot of the important problems are being addressed by a bunch of companies. So I am very much in a build mode of like, hey, we have these companies. Which ones are going to be those large platforms? There's obviously new ways to think about addressing a lot of those because of AI just happened. And I think you'll probably see some changes in regulation over time as well. So there is that sort of evergreen nature to it. What I think we need to create that transformed architecture, the health assurance architecture, I think we have the best. We just got to like make sure we stay focused on building the companies that I referenced earlier into the next $50, $100 billion companies that serve what's 20% of GDP.
Yeah.
And so my personal time in the healthcare, a lot of it is in building right now.
I mean, obviously, you famously are a big investor in Stripe, massive company. I think, on the healthcare side, do you feel like there's an opportunity for an individual company to be kind of worth $100 billion, or is it like, a collection of kind of $10 billion companies that, are targeting different kind of end segments of the market?
I absolutely do. And I think not one, but many. I think healthcare, unlike some of the other industries, should produce a few companies that are defining. There needs to be an AI platform. There needs to be a software platform. Every one of the ones that we've sort of started with the intention that, hey, if we get it right, it should be that big because the market size is so large. I mean, it's a $4 trillion part of GDP approximately. And we spend $150 billion on, I'm going to call it, even though it's more than that, payment processing $1 trillion, right? And boy, some companies to come and, first of all, compress the load on healthcare, the parasitic load on healthcare from a cost perspective. But, maybe that should be $20, $30 billion of cost, like in credit card processing.
Yeah.
And whoever does that will be a multi-$100 billion company. So I think that those are the kinds of opportunities that are going to happen. You got to think big, you got to think long term, and it's a grind. I mean, it's, as I said, everything we build in healthcare, none of it I can borrow what I learned from other industries to bring to healthcare. So it's a brand new playbook because it's just a regulated market. It's not economically rational, and you just gotta think creatively about how to go create value.
Yeah. What about the other way around? Are there lessons you feel like you've taken away on the tech-enabled services side that now you get to, now that like the broader AI world has woken up to kind of the interest of services companies, like things you feel like you've learned on those side that's relevant?
Yeah. So, if you think about the last 15 years, pre-AI, it was all cloud, social, mobile, and distribution was handed to us. And we could actually get a bunch of engineers, create good product experiences, iterate, and build companies. That was the App Store economy, right? All the things that got built there. I'm not saying they were easy businesses. I'm saying you could you could solve for distribution in a way that technologists could understand distribution.
Yeah.
Right? You think about the next 15 years, it's a transformation exercise. Transformation essentially means from the beginning, you need to learn how to partner with your clients and go, work with them deeply, and distribution is the one thing you can't take for granted. So what these companies are trying to transform, whether they're transforming technical services or they're trying to go into different verticals, the one thing you don't have is distribution. So I think that muscle of teaming up with these companies, treating them like partners, not customers, and engaging effectively, learning that and now bringing it into this whole movement, it's actually one of the reasons why we've been able to build a lot of momentum in our creation strategies, because we intuitively get that. And so founders that come work with us, we can kind of supplement them with that muscle so that they can be in that transformation mode versus disruption mode, which is what the previous cycle was in some ways.
You mentioned, a few minutes ago, kind of like, I think you mentioned the possible vulnerability or possibility to create like a next gen Veeva. Curious, what would that entail?
Well, I think one of the things AI does is it eliminates the need for having a system of record over time. So I think you can go into every one of these markets and say, well, what if there was no system of record? What if Epic wasn't necessary or Salesforce wasn't necessary? Because the intelligence was just, you've got the data stacks, you've got the intelligence is built in the AI, both regulatory requirements as well as workflows and, personalization, everything. What would that world look like? So I think you can apply that world to Veeva and say, well, that's going to be different too, right? Everything, if you put your mind to it, you can literally say there's a better way to do this. Now, some of these companies are entrepreneurial by nature and they'll themselves get there, but I think most won't. And that is the opportunity for, our ecosystem.
They're kind of uniquely vulnerable right now in a kind of interesting way. What about the international side of things? Obviously, you do a lot of investing in the U.S. How do you think about the international healthcare opportunities?
International, so we do about, I would say, 60% in the U.S., 20% in Europe. We have a great leader there, Jeanette Furstenberg, and we have about 10 to 15% in India, which is led by Neeraj and Priya. And one of the things is if you're going to truly build what we call a global investment and transformation company, you need leaders that care about the opportunity in each of those areas. So I think we have real good local leadership that cares about applying technology and addressing the resilience needs of these geographies. And both of them are so different.
Yeah.
India is a hope, growth, innovation, rising, third superpower perhaps in the next 10 to 15 years. And Europe is a transformation opportunity. A lot of concern, a lot of worrying that it's going to be difficult for European companies. And, I sort of look at it and say, that's where you want to go and apply our creation capabilities. So one's transformation, one's innovation, as a firm, like we obviously span the whole cycle. And so the key is to understand the market opportunity and apply the right tools that our company has to offer in terms of deploying capital and building companies.
Yeah. Do you ever get tempted to you build one in the US, you're like, well, the same thing would work actually quite well in Europe or India or another place, or how much of it ends up being, do you feel like you can take lessons from what you built, in one geography?
It's interesting. I think it's very important to stay first principled. So take healthcare, since we're talking a lot about it, even though it's about 20% of what we do. All my learnings from the US that I take to India is on what not to do. So it's actually not about what India should be doing. It's sort of like, geez, it's a greenfield. And here's all the mistakes we made in the last 50 years. Let's not fall in that trap. So my conversation with entrepreneurs there, as well as, providers that we work actively with, is around that. Which is don't be seduced by it just because it's a Western idea of we have is bankrupting us. So sometimes it's about that. The rivers, if you look at the payments industry and you look at all the work that, open banking stuff in Europe, much more innovative than US. Look at, you got Monzo, which we're investors in, Revolut, so much coming out there. Look at India, even more leapfrogging, right? I mean, they with a UPI and the ID stuff that Nandan did, who was a good friend of ours, completely different. So what can we learn from there on how to create enduring platforms that truly enable ecosystems versus not? And what should we also not learn from there? Because that also has its challenges, the way those have been built. So for me, it's sort of just looking at how these different markets take hold of different supply chains, if you will, and then leveraging that as we apply the AI transformation lens to say, hey, what might work? But each market is so idiosyncratic. Like I think the key advice I would have for people is just be first principled.
Yeah.
Don't pattern match.
You're doing all these AI transformations right now, across a bunch of different industries. What does a platform team look like for those kind of companies? Like, what are kind of the shared capabilities that you think about building at GC to apply across the board?
So at GC itself, we're actually doing some AI research, and we're thinking through, how do you really effectively do these transformations? This whole idea of, what is the muscle around organic and inorganic, activity for growth in the same company? How do you really do that effectively? How do you build teams that know how to do that? I think that's an important thing. I think you need a financial apparatus that's beyond just growth equity. So we have Customer Value Fund. That's a security that one of my partners invented, and is all funded on, hey, if you understand your customer acquisition engine, you can finance your CAC because it's an asset. And how do we go about doing that? So I think we've been trying to take all these pieces together and say, okay, what's the outcome we want to create, and how do we go build with the founder with all these pieces?
I mean, I think that alternative financing is really interesting, especially in the context of one thing people talk a lot about in the healthcare world is like services businesses and the future of them in the venture world. And I'm curious how you think about when a services business is venture backable or when actually some of these other types of financing might make more sense.
First of all, it's not either or. So when we sit down with a founder, we actually don't start with the presupposition that, hey, you need to, let's give you equity or let's give you, growth, customer acquisition financing. To me, it's like the reality is at different phases of a company, you probably need different types of capital. Think about what happens in other markets, right? And so we're also maturing to get to that same type of a more sort of sophisticated set of solutions for founders. That's the way we think about it. And I would say services businesses are only interesting if you can actually inflect their margin structure with technology. If it's about take services businesses, put more together and just get scale, that's private equity.
Yeah.
We're not into private equity. We're not doing that. The reason we call it creation, the reason we call it venture buyouts versus leverage buyouts is because we're actually coming in with the idea of putting innovation in versus putting leverage in.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, the way we sort of distinguish what we take on versus what we don't take on.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And I do think, in the service world, it feels like people have learned, there's obviously there's a cap on some of these outcomes that have been in the healthcare services world. And so I think, what you guys have done very shrewdly is get into these companies early, I feel like it'll be interesting to see with accounting and law firms and all these things. There's just a natural physics to like how big these businesses can get, and they'll obviously be no one's going to dominate the market in a way a single tech company
These
does.
are not winner take all markets. Yeah, absolutely.
And it'll be interesting to see, how the margin structure of these industries evolves over time. Obviously, in the immediate term, replacing a bunch of labor lets you be high margin, but I wonder whether some of this stuff gets competed down over time.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, which is very interesting. I mean, you have one of the most interesting seats I feel like in the world to just think about where the world's going. Like, what are you thinking about these days? Well, I don't know. What do you spend most of your time thinking about?
So I might as well preemptively answer these two questions because I get them all the time. What do I focus on? I focus on boiling the ocean. That's what I always say. I mean, there's so much interesting stuff to do. And the leverage model of our business is, you find an interesting problem. If you want, you can actually assemble the right teams, have the capital base, have the right relationships, and go do something about it, and probably build a business to some level of success. So I think, for us, because the firm is so, I shouldn't say the firm, I always say to my own team, we should call it the company. So I'm going to say the company is so entrepreneurial that we have a general bias towards wanting to take on problems where we can transform industries across the geographies where we focus. The thing I worry about is picking the right problems, because I think it would be very dissatisfying if we take on working on something and we find out, 5, 7, 8 years later that we succeeded, but it just wasn't worth the effort. Meaning it was sort of the idea it just wasn't the right thing. We could have been working on something much bigger. So that's what I lose sleep over. Are we really working on the right things in the company? Frankly, expanding the possibilities of what the entrepreneurs that are coming and working with us are trying to do, or are we going to were we really playing in the zero-sum game of venture where if we didn't do it, somebody else would have? That modality in venture has become much, much less interesting to me.
Yeah, so you want to do things where really you'd be the only person kind of providing that financing vehicle.
It's not only like we're very collaborative. We love working with others as well. To me, it's much more. I just want to be able to work on problems where you can create these outsized outcomes.
Yeah,
we can manufacture outliers. Why is it that we're all just fighting for the few things that sit in the power law? Why can't we actually expand that?
What are you paying attention to on? I mean, obviously we have new administration coming in. What are you paying attention to on the policy side over the next year?
We have the General Catalyst Policy Institute that's run by Teresa Carlson and Miriam Malika in DC, and they're very focused on understanding what are the industries that are likely to undergo change with policy, and how can we be good thought partners to the policymakers as folks that are thinking about end-to-end transformations. So we're already engaged in some industries with incoming folks, but more on my whole thing is we just want to show you what we're working on. So it sort of gets your brain going on the things, and think about it. Tell us what policy issues you're thinking through, and we can be a resource to you. I think that's the agenda. And at the end of the day, you want to create markets that are behaving with the aligned business models, and creates a fair opportunity for everybody. So I think it's a principled way of saying let's help set the right policy that transforms these industries and creates market leaders. Because if the policy frameworks are right, then our industry and the community of entrepreneurs can thrive. Then we'll all do well. And I think that really is the mindset with which we're engaging there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the venture ecosystem seems particularly involved in this incoming administration, and so I imagine that presents some interesting opportunities on the company side.
Yeah, I think it will. The key is to make sure we're, really doing things that are enduring in the long term, and sort of creating policies that will survive the test of time versus creating short-term advantages for, our businesses. Because I don't think that'll catch up to you eventually.
Yeah. You've obviously been such a huge part of all these incubations, and like your, willpower is kind of legendary, and like kind of making these things, getting them off the ground. How do you think about like scaling that? Obviously, at some point, you can't be, deeply involved with each of these as the organization gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I'm actually usually surprised. I'm involved in fewer and fewer of the incubations. I think more and more people in the company are excited about doing it, and some of it speaks to the fact that the more entrepreneurial the culture is, the more people are like, oh, maybe I can go solve this problem because I'm not seeing it in the ecosystem. More and more of our teammates are starting to think that way. So it's already way more diversified than you may think. Yeah. I think the reality is that the older incubations are more mature, so they're more in the news. But a lot of the work that's happening now, like what Mark's doing, what Jeanette, Neeraj, Priya have done in Europe and India around creation opportunities, team in our infrastructure, our resilience team, there's a lot of creative stuff happening. And one of my proudest moments over the last couple of years has been that we institutionalized creation in our company, as opposed to it used to be the founders who started the firm in the first decade, and then it was me in the last decade. But now it really is that everybody is doing it, because the economics of that business, the performance has been incredible.
Yeah, that's funny. It felt like in the ZIRP era, there were all these incubators that popped up, and everybody was trying to do this. And I think a lot of it went nowhere. And I feel like there's been, it probably from the outside, people got tempted, and it seems easier. Seems like you guys have done really well. Like, what have you noticed? I guess, and
I think so. One of the reasons that YC is very successful, and on a much more limited scale, like, we continue to think this is a good strategy for us, is, and the key insight, I think, is you don't create an incubator, because if you work backwards from the companies that truly move the needle, that are category defining companies, and they all look different. They all have their own cultures. So I think if you turn the initial conditions into an incubator and say, now we're going to produce these cultures that are all different, like, I just think that's still one condition. I don't think that's the way to start. You have to let these companies exist and breathe in the way they want to. And that is something that I think is a core, there are many reasons why YC became such an institution, but I think that's one important reason. And, we try to follow the same thing. So when people, I don't have a playbook. Every project we take on is a brand new thing that we think about with a brand new lens and try to unlearn everything we know from before. And it's hard to scale, but we're also not trying to scale it. I think our, if our creation fund will do maybe 10 things a year, where our venture capital business probably does, 50 to 60 investments a year. So we're not trying to scale it. We're trying to put a lot of thought into it and maintain that artisanal nature to it and just do it in a deeper and deeper way with more and more ambitious founders.
Yeah, I love that. What do you think happens with AI and venture in the next few years? Do we, see some bubble burst at some point, or is there just, all this pent up public demand that some of these things get out for, or how does that kind of shake out?
I think AI is very clearly a driver of operating leverage, and is very clearly a driver of great consumer experiences. I'm very convinced of that because I think there's enough places where we have gotten our hands dirty and seen that it's working that I'm like, well, so there's value capture. It's going to happen. So is this going to be a bubble that bursts? I don't think so. I think the unknown is, so every company that's being built today, I think the definition of excellence to me is you're moving forward constantly. You're not overthinking stuff because technology changes all the time, and the ecosystem around you is changing all the time. So you don't really know. So you have to keep iterating and figuring out. And as opposed to, I got every decision perfect, which there was a time where that was the best way to build a company, but maybe not in this phase. So the teams that are the most adaptive will get there. But, the ones that are like really dogmatic about what they believe, because there's so much that has started, they don't get there. I mean, think about all the things that started when GPT 3.0 came out, and all those things got obsolesced because 4.0 had much of that features and functionality. So thinking about taking on harder problems and thinking on a longer horizon, the ones that are doing that, I do think will be some of the most outstanding outcomes. I mean, this next 15 is going to be way more interesting than last 15, and last 15 was amazing, right? When you really when you really think about it. And so I really believe that, but I really believe that because I think there's true transfer of value into this new paradigm, but it requires agile thinking and this new definition of excellence that I'm talking about. And so, will there be a bunch of companies that don't make it? Yeah, but that's what happens when there's a platform shift. But I see some founders doing incredible things. I mean, it's just remarkable when you see the use cases taking hold with AI and some of these things. And so the scale of impact is going to be stunning. So just have to stay focused on that and not get caught in the dynamics of how everything is changing around us and have like a longer term true north. Yeah. Founders that get it, I think they'll get there and they'll build something amazing.
How much do you think about defensibility? I feel like that's like the big question in AI right now. And obviously this velocity and rapidly changing landscape, it almost feels silly to be like, well, a moat today could be, completely obsolete tomorrow.
Look, I think the defensibility is not going to be in the software you build. It's going to be in the relationships you build. Yeah. So that to me was my point earlier. And it's going to be in the way you're subscribing to a theory of change around these industries. And if your defensibility is just in your wrappers around these foundation models, it ain't going to last. So I think you have to, that's what I'm saying, this mindset of transformation and thinking about the moat beyond just, there's a technical moat when everything is so dynamic technically, that's an important place to focus.
Yeah. And I imagine then it seems like your philosophy that you have for entrepreneurs in the healthcare space probably then expands to other spaces as well.
It's the same mindset everywhere. I think it's the key is, whether it's healthcare, whether it's media, whether it's defense, industrials, energy, we're doing work in all these areas. We're newer in some and much deeper in others like healthcare, but the philosophy is the same. It's about radical collaboration. It's about transformation. And it's about making those choices with first principles on what is the evolution of the sort of coexistence of the agentic workforce and the human workforce.
Yeah. Well, this has been fascinating. We always like to end our interview with a standard set of quick-fire questions. And so maybe to start, what's one thing you've changed your mind on in tech in the last year?
I was very unclear on how foundation models are going to develop. Because, this whole, like, what does commoditization mean in that layer? And I think the role that these foundation model companies can play is, like, way larger than just being able to produce the right models, because there's a continuum from their code generation to everything you can do from there. And so, I think we were slow to invest at the infrastructure, sort of the model layer. We have done all the data infrastructure, we've done all the transformation stuff up top. We sort of stayed away from this, and I think I was just slow to properly understand it.
Is that them moving more into the application layer, or is?
Well, what is an application, right? I mean, if it's just agents and you can auto-generate agents, and the foundation models can have deeper and deeper understanding of, it's a debate between the horizontal models versus vertical models. Like, how much can you do? So I just think these companies, if if they build the right cultures, could have way bigger opportunity than I originally understood.
Yeah, they could tick off some of these horizontal use cases.
And I'm probably the slowest person in the Valley, and this sort of sounds stupid that I'm saying that because we didn't invest in OpenAI, for example. But I just immediately went towards a transformation opportunity, and I'm like, oh boy, I should have spent more time at the infrastructure layer. So
yeah, super interesting. What's like an example of something you thought would work at GC that maybe didn't, or vice versa, something you didn't think much of that actually ended up being like a big success at GC?
I think Pranav's customer value fund vision, when he first brought it to me, I was like, go away, it's never going to work. I think he kept coming back. I mean, I really admire him for his belief in this. And I gave him $1 million to pilot. And I was like, he showed it. I was like, I don't really know. And then, we paid more money. And then today it's a, multi-billion-dollar product that's serving, tens and tens of companies. And I just didn't know what to expect. And it sort of taught me the importance of innovating in our own industry. So what does innovation mean in the venture capital industry today? It's an accordion of fund size in the context of bubble and stage, sector, and geography funds. It's really literally not innovation when you think about it. It's like the same product, financial product we feed to everybody, right? When the company building has changed, the role of technology has changed, and he really opened my eyes to, hey, we have to be way better at disrupting ourselves if we're going to, or transforming ourselves, I should say, to have a better value proposition for founders. If we're going to transform the industries with them, we have to transform ourselves first.
Yeah. Do you think there's room for more and more different financing products for founders?
I believe so. And we're very open-minded. And it comes back to what's the best way to serve them for their company building needs. And all the things I talked about in terms of levers you can pull with our creation strategy, some of that might need different ways of financing that, and we should be open-minded to it. We should really think about what do the founders need versus kind of, hammer looking for a nail, which is what I feel like our industry has been for a long time.
I guess on the healthcare side, real fast, if we gave you a magic wand and you can make one policy change to improve healthcare in the U.S., what would you do?
For me, it really comes down to true interoperability. I think there's a real commitment in the ecosystem that we're going to invite more innovation in, and that is about the relationship with the electronic medical record systems, the systems of record. What is that really going to look like? Well,
it's been a fascinating conversation. I'm sure folks will want to pull on all sorts of threads. So I'll leave the last word to you. Any place you want to point folks, where can they go to learn more about you, what you're doing at GC?
I think our team does a good job of posting everything on LinkedIn. So that's probably where you can track a lot of the stuff we're doing. But we're very open, just ping me on LinkedIn or email, and happy to chat.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for coming on. This is really fun.
Yeah, glad to. Thanks for having me.